I need to check the list of used names before writing. The band names are Claire, Dana, Priya, David, Ray, Gerald, Marcus, Kevin, Lee, Andrea, Nora, Brendan, Simone, Owen, Faye, Theo, Rosalind, Iris, Carol, Glenn, Tommy, Maisie, Patrick, Vanessa, Lena, Jesse, Will, Renata, Hazel, Miles, Courtney, Mom. I'll use fresh names: Ellie, Neerager, Serena, sister, Douglas, stepfather, Patrice, mother, Holt, stepfather's lawyer. I didn't cry at my own graduation party. I stood there in the backyard of the house I grew up in, holding a plastic cup of sparkling cider because my mother didn't want alcohol around the wrong people, and I smiled at everyone who came up to congratulate me. I shook hands. I said thank you. I laughed at the right moments. And when my sister made her little speech, the one that was supposed to be about me, I kept smiling even as my face went numb. That was the first time I remember understanding what I was to my family. Not a person. A footnote. My sister Serena is 4 years older than me. She has my mother's cheekbones, my mother's laugh, my mother's way of walking into a room like she already owns everything in it. Growing up, I used to think I just hadn't grown into myself yet, that I'd wake up one day and suddenly have whatever it was they had. That ease, that belonging. I kept waiting for it. It never came. Our stepfather Douglas came into our lives when I was 6. He was quiet in the way that very confident men are quiet. Not shy, just careful. He watched more than he talked. He had a way of listening to you, like what you were saying was the only thing happening in the world. And when I was small, I used to follow him around the house just to feel that, just to feel like I existed in a room. My mother married him for reasons I didn't understand then, and understand too well now. He had money, not flashy money. Old, quiet money. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. He had a house in Connecticut that had been in his family for 3 generations, and a small investment firm, and a way of paying for things without ever making you feel like he was paying for anything. My mother had 2 daughters and a smile that could rearrange a room. They were, in that way, a perfect match. Serena adored him. Or she adored what he represented. She called him Dad from the very first month, which I remember thinking was fast, though I was 6 and didn't have a word for what I was noticing. I called him Douglas for 3 years, until one evening he sat down next to me while I was doing homework at the kitchen table, and he said, very quietly, "You don't have to call me anything you don't want to, but I want you to know the door's open." And I looked at him and I said, "Okay, Dad," and that was that. I don't think my mother ever forgave me for taking longer than Serena did. That's the thing about growing up in a family where you are the wrong shape. You don't know it all at once. It comes to you slowly, in accumulations. The way the photos on the mantle get rearranged, and somehow you're always the one half cut at the edge. The way your mother brags about Serena's grades at the dinner table, and then pauses when someone asks about yours and says, "Ellie's very creative." The way birthday dinners somehow always end up being about something Serena has going on. The way you start to understand that creative is not a compliment in this house. It's a consolation. I was 27 when I graduated with my master's degree. I know that's older than usual. I took time off in between for reasons that are my own, and I worked 2 jobs to pay for most of it, and I finished. I was proud of myself in that quiet way, where you don't quite let yourself feel the whole thing because you're not sure anyone else will understand why it's a big deal. My mother threw me a party. I should have known something was wrong when she offered. She invited her friends, her tennis circle, a few of Douglas's colleagues, which was kind of him. Serena flew in from Seattle, which surprised me because she had been distant for almost a year and I hadn't pushed it. When Serena is distant, it's usually because something is happening in her life that she doesn't want to share, and the price of getting close again is pretending the distance never happened. I'd learned that rhythm. The party was fine. People were kind. Douglas pulled me aside early in the evening and squeezed my hand and said, "I'm proud of you. I mean that." He looked tired. He'd been dealing with some health things that he downplayed, the way he downplayed everything. I didn't know at the time how tired he actually was. Then Serena gave her speech. She stood up with her glass of wine and her smile. The one that's wide and bright and somehow never reaches her eyes. And she said all the things you're supposed to say. She talked about how she remembered me as a little kid doing arts and crafts at the table. She talked about how I'd always been a free spirit. And then she laughed, the way she laughs when she's about to say something she's been waiting all evening to say. And she said, "Honestly, looking at Ellie, I sometimes wonder if she even belongs in this family. She's just so different from the rest of us." She paused for the laugh. A few people gave it to her. I used to joke that the hospital gave Mom the wrong baby. Another laugh. "Maybe we should get one of those DNA tests, just to make sure." And my mother laughed. She didn't just smile politely. She laughed. She put her hand over her mouth and laughed. And then she looked at Douglas, and Douglas was not laughing. He was looking at Serena with an expression I had never seen on his face before. I didn't have a name for it that night. I do now. It was grief. I said nothing. I smiled. Someone changed the subject. The party continued. I stood in my own backyard holding my plastic cup, and I kept my face very still, and I thought, this is what I am to them. A punchline with good manners. I drove home that night and sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment for a long time before I went inside. Douglas called me the next morning. He didn't mention the speech. He asked how I was feeling. He asked about my job search. He asked if I needed anything. Before he hung up, he said, "Ellie, you are exactly where you belong. Don't let anyone take that from you." I said thank you. I didn't sleep well that week. That was 8 months before he died. He went quickly in the end, which is the merciful thing they say about cancer when it moves fast. He had known for over a year and told almost no one. He told me 3 months before he passed, when I drove up to Connecticut to help him with some things around the house. We sat on the back porch and he told me, and I held it together until I got to my car, and then I didn't. He died on a Tuesday in October. The leaves were just turning. My mother called me and her voice was very even and she said, "He's gone." And then she said she had to go and make calls, and she hung up. The funeral was at a church in Hartford that had known his family for decades. I sat in the second row because my mother had arranged the seating, and I had learned long ago not to argue about arrangements. Serena sat in the front row in a black dress that had clearly been purchased specifically for the occasion, because Serena does not do anything without considering how it looks. I wore a navy coat that Douglas had helped me pick out the previous Christmas at a department store in the city, and I thought about that every moment of the service. After the burial, we went back to the Connecticut house. My mother moved through the rooms like she was already taking inventory. I noticed it and I told myself I was being uncharitable. I went home the next day. The call from the lawyer came 11 weeks later. His name was Mr. Albrecht, and he had a measured, precise voice, and he said he was calling on behalf of Douglas's estate and would like to schedule a time to meet with the family. My mother took the call, and I heard about it through her, which should have told me something. She said it was routine. She said these things always take a while. She said she and Serena would be there, and I was welcome to come if I wanted. Welcome to come if I wanted. I want you to sit with that for a moment. I went. I drove up to Hartford on a Wednesday morning, and I wore the navy coat again, and I found parking, and I walked into an office building that smelled like old carpet and wood polish, and I sat down in a conference room across from Mr. Polish, Albrecht, and next to my mother and Serena, who had come down from Seattle again, which told me that she knew more about what was in this meeting than she was letting on. Mr. Albrecht had a folder. He had reading glasses that he placed on his face with a deliberateness that made the room go quiet. He said he was going to read the relevant portions of the will, and then we would have time for questions. Douglas had a grown son from his first marriage, Everett, who lived in Oregon and had flown in for the meeting as well. He sat across from us with an expression that was perfectly neutral, and I immediately liked him for it. The house in Connecticut went to a historic preservation trust with a right of use for my mother during her lifetime. That surprised her. I watched her absorb it. His investment accounts were divided between a charitable foundation in his name, Everett, and here Mr. Albrecht paused and looked up at me specifically. Me. Not my mother. Not Serena. Me. Serena's jaw didn't drop, but it did something adjacent to that. My mother went very still. Everett nodded once, slowly, like this was not a surprise. There was also a letter. Mr. Albrecht said Douglas had asked that it be read aloud in its entirety in this room to everyone present. He unfolded it and he read, "I am not going to reproduce the whole letter here because some of it is mine, and I am keeping it that way. But the part that matters for this story, the part that explained everything I had spent 20-odd years trying to understand, was this: Douglas had known since before he married my mother that I was not his biological child. He had found out early in their marriage, through means he did not explain in detail, and he had made a decision that I want you to understand the weight of. He decided it did not matter. He said it in the letter plainly. It did not matter. It had never mattered. And the only thing that had ever mattered was that I was his daughter in every way that counted. He said he was leaving me what he was leaving me because he had watched for years as I was made to feel like the edge of the family instead of the center of it, and he wanted to correct that with the one instrument he had left. He asked me, in the letter, not to be bitter. He said, bitterness is a kind of loyalty to the people who hurt you, and he didn't want me loyal to that. The room was very quiet when Mr. Albrecht finished reading. My mother's face was a color I don't have a name for. Serena was staring at the table. Everett was still looking at me with that neutral expression, and then he gave me one small nod, and I understood that he had known his father, had known the kind of man he was, and was not surprised by any of this. I didn't say anything for a while. Then I said, "Thank you," to Mr. Pester. Albrecht, which is a strange thing to say in a room like that, but felt like the right thing. My mother found her voice on the drive home. I know this because she called me before I was even back on the highway. She said the will wasn't fair. She said Douglas hadn't been in his right mind toward the end. She said she had spoken to her own attorney, and there were grounds to contest. Her voice had that particular controlled quality it gets when she is very angry and trying to sound reasonable, and I had heard it my whole life, and for the first time I didn't feel afraid of it. I said, "Mom, he knew the whole time, and he chose me anyway. Please think about what you're saying." She hung up. Serena called 2 days later. She didn't apologize for the speech at my graduation party. She didn't acknowledge it. She started the conversation by saying that she hoped we could handle this as a family, and I sat with the phone in my hand, and I thought about all the years I had been told, in one way or another, that I was not quite the right fit for that word, and I said, "Serena, I love you, but I'm not going to negotiate with you about what Dad chose to do, and I need some time before we talk again." She said that was very selfish of me. I said maybe. There's a coffee shop near my apartment that I go to most mornings. I went the next day and I got my usual order, and I sat at the table by the window and I watched the street outside, and I thought about Douglas. I thought about him sitting across from me at that kitchen table when I was 9, listening to me talk about something I can't even remember now, listening like it was the only thing happening. I thought about how I used to follow him around the house just to be in the same room as someone who made me feel like I was real. He knew from the beginning, and it never once changed how he looked at me. I cried in that coffee shop. Not the kind of crying that is embarrassing. Just the quiet kind, with the paper cup warm in both hands, watching the street. The woman at the next table pretended not to notice, which was kind of her. I have not spoken to my mother since that phone call. It has been 7 months. I don't know if that's permanent. I suspect it isn't, because I am not someone who is good at permanent. But I needed the distance to understand something that I couldn't understand while I was inside it. Serena and I have texted a handful of times. Practical things. Nothing real. I don't know what we are to each other anymore, and I think that might be okay. I think some relationships need to be renegotiated from the ground up, and I don't know yet if either of us is ready to do that work. I met Everett for lunch in the city a few months ago. He told me that Douglas had talked about me often. He said his father used to say that I had his curiosity, his way of watching the world and wanting to understand it. He said it matter-of-factly, the way you describe the color of someone's hair, and I had to excuse myself for a minute. I used some of what Douglas left me to pay off my student loans. I used some of it to move into an apartment that has a window that faces south, which I have wanted my whole adult life. I put the rest somewhere safe, and I am trying to be thoughtful about it in a way that I think he would recognize. I have not set up a foundation. I have not donated it all to charity. I am keeping it because it is mine, and because he gave it to me, and because there is nothing wrong with accepting something that was freely given by someone who loved you. What I've done is this. I called my oldest friend, the one who has known me since we were 7 and has been present for most of the best and worst moments of my life, and I said, I want to tell you something. And I told her about the letter. All of it. And she listened the way Douglas used to listen, like I was the only thing happening, and when I finished she was quiet for a moment and then she said, he sounds like he was exactly the father you deserved. And I said, yes, he was. There is a photograph on my desk now. It's from the Christmas we spent at the Connecticut house when I was maybe 11 or 12, the one where it snowed more than anyone expected, and we ended up stuck there for an extra 2 days, and Douglas taught me how to play chess badly while the storm blew outside. In the photo, we're both looking at the board, not at the camera, and he has this expression, focused, almost amused, and I'm leaning forward with my elbows on the table, the way he always told me not to, and we look like what we were. We look like a father and a daughter. I have been told my whole life that I don't quite fit, that I am the edge, the footnote, the creative one, the different one, the one who maybe got mixed up at the hospital. I spent years walking around with that inside me like something I'd swallowed wrong. This low-grade question that I couldn't shake. Where do I actually belong? I know the answer now. I knew it in that conference room when I heard his voice in Mr. Teppan, Albrecht's careful reading, and I knew it again at that coffee shop window, and I know it every morning when I see that photograph on my desk. I belong to him, and he belonged to me, and no DNA test, no sister's speech, no inheritance dispute has ever changed that or ever will. I was wrong about a lot of things, but I was right about him from the very first time I called him Dad. I used to think belonging was something you were born into, that it was handed to you the same way eye color is handed to you, decided before you had any say in the matter. I spent most of my life believing that, which is why I worked so hard to make myself smaller, easier, less of whatever it was that seemed to bother people about me. I thought if I just fit better, eventually it would feel like home. What I know now is that belonging isn't inherited, it's built. It's built in 1,000 quiet moments. Someone sitting across from you at a kitchen table and actually listening. Someone squeezing your hand at a party when a joke lands wrong. Someone writing a letter that they know they won't be alive to see you read. Douglas built something with me over 20 years that my own mother and sister never bothered to try. That wasn't an accident. That was a choice he made every single day. And the choices a person makes consistently over time are who they actually are. Serena's joke at my graduation party didn't come from nowhere. It came from years of small permissions, little moments where cruelty dressed itself up as humor and nobody said stop. My mother laughing instead of flinching was not a single failure. It was the result of a long pattern of choosing the easier thing over the right thing. And Serena, who had been given every advantage and every ounce of my mother's approval, still needed to diminish me to feel tall. That's not strength. That's what the absence of real character looks like when it runs out of places to hide. I don't say that with bitterness. I've thought about it enough that it's just observation now. People who genuinely feel secure don't need to remind others that they don't belong. The cruelty was a mirror, not a verdict. Douglas understood something that took me much longer to learn. That integrity is not what you do when people are watching. It's what you do when it would be easier not to. He could have treated me differently once he knew. Nobody would have blamed him. Instead, he chose, quietly and without ceremony, to keep showing up. He kept listening. He kept making space. And at the very end, when he had one last instrument left, he used it to say, "You were never the footnote. You were always the point." I think about what it takes to live that way, the discipline of it. The daily decision to let your actions be governed by what you actually believe is right rather than what's convenient or comfortable. That's not easy. It's the hardest kind of intelligence there is. Not the kind that scores well on tests, but the kind that knows what matters and acts accordingly even when the cost is real. What I carry forward from all of this isn't the money, and it isn't the vindication, as satisfying as that conference room silence was. What I carry forward is a clearer understanding of who I want to be. I want to be the person in someone's life who makes them feel real. I want my choices, accumulated over years, to say something worth saying. I want to deserve the kind of love Douglas gave me by learning how to give it back to the people in my life who need it. He asked me not to be bitter. I'm trying. Most days, I think I'm succeeding.